How are you?
Good, man. It's good to be here. It's a great day,
What
and
are you
it's
what,
good to be here speaking with you. Thank you so much.
what are you feeling today?
Good, man. Good. Let's see. Let's see what the future holds. This is a good transition for us. A good. The Constitution held, and now let's see if we can do what we need to do to get on the right track, and then hold those accountable who need to be accountable after we get ourselves together.
It's an interesting time to be releasing a record called the Democracy Suite. Given that in the past few weeks, past few months, democracy's really been tested in the United States. What's been on your mind these last few weeks?
Well, I'm always thinking about democracy and our way of life. I've been writing pieces for 40 years that deal with issues of equality and freedom and the human experience. And jazz itself is a, a, a mythology, a way to mythologize our way of life and the challenges of it, and also the benefits of it. So I don't feel I was happy about what I saw around the election, the number of people that voted, the debates that took place, the acts of citizenship that I saw in the various states and different lawmakers of different parties who came together to say, nah, we have ideological differences, but we are not willing to put ideology and the ability to make money and to do whatever it is we're trying to do. We're going to put that on the back burner for now. We're not just going to allow absolute lawlessness, but that's what happens in these types of situations, not just in this present time, but across time. You get to a certain point and you go too far. In America, we had the whole McCarthy was McCarthyism, where at a certain point, Joe McCarthy, he could have gotten by with, it's like gambling. He could have gotten by with taking people's rights from them and subjecting them to the power of his office in a corrupt and unsavory manner. But they always go another step, and then you don't know when that step is going to be. you, it's always tricky.
Mm.
So we've seen in this cycle around this election and all of what happened, just people who had been abusing power went too far. And I don't celebrate so much about Trump or not Trump, because in our country the left and the right are both corrupt.
It's an interesting time. I think a lot of people are expecting things to change overnight, and that's certainly a curious expectation, I'll say. When do I still have you there? I think I might have lost you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay,
My phone.
I want to play a track for you. Take a listen to this. From my guest, Wynton Marsalis, the Democracy Suite that is out amongst the people for J Bat. Who's J Bat?
Jonathan Baptiste, great young piano player. He's a music director on the Colbert Show. But
Yeah, he's great.
I've known him since he was a kid. He's the age of my oldest son, and I always loved him. He's from Kenner, Louisiana, which where I'm from. It's strange, two people from Kenner. He grew up in a subdivision called Lincoln Manor. I always tease him and say his mama must not have ever let him out the house. And he just always been about the people. His band is called Stay Human. I saw a picture of him on the front of on the art section of the New York Times, on one of the sections, playing with a great young drummer named Joe Saylor, also a kid that I knew when he was in high school. I remember my father talking about him. And they were out in the street playing, surrounded by people with masks on, dancing and doing their thing at a Black Lives Matter protest or at a street protest. And I was just proud of seeing them out, because all the years, my first question in my jazz classes was always, what does the United States Constitution do? Because I find that our music is very, very closely aligned with the pursuit of balance and the ideology that is expressed in the Constitution, the ideals. So to see them out there participating in doing it and carving out a space, I'm just proud of them. And a lot of my younger musicians called me in this time, not Jay Bat, but a lot of the other ones younger than him, and say, man, get out, Charles, climb up out of that jar formaldehyde and come out here in the street and play with us. So I love seeing all of them out there. They're not all as celebrated as him, but they're just as passionate. and it was uplifting for me.
That's the second time you've mentioned something like that. At the beginning of our conversation, you said jazz is a way of mythologizing the world that we're living in right now, or our lives. You just said that the first thing at the beginning of your classes you say is that, what does the United States Constitution give us? And I've also read you say that jazz is a metaphor for democracy. Can you talk me
Right.
through that?
Well, if you look at it, it can art forms that come from ways of life. They're always metaphors for the ways of life that they come from, because there's nothing else they can be. It's just, okay, you want to know about the Elizabethan England, Shakespeare. I mean, what else is he gonna? It's not going to be about the age of the samurai. So if you take our practices first, we can all improvise. Okay, that's a symbol of personal freedom. Now there are challenges with everybody improvising, because when everybody starts to improvise, it sounds like noise. So then we have something called swing. Swing is an organizing rhythm, and it's a principle. It means now it's on you, and you have the responsibility to achieve balance. That means how loud you play, how long you solo, how acute you are about other members of the group, the fact that you have to know the arrangement, you have to know the chord progressions. If you play a piece that's already all written out, you don't have to know that. Or if you play a piece that you don't really have to improvise, like the bass plays the same part over and over again, the drums play the same part, or they're machines, and you solo on top of it, you may not even be in the room with them. Jazz, you can't play like that. It's about finding a balance with some people who don't necessarily want to be balanced. So the desire to swing is the thing that has come most under fire in the last 20 or so years in jazz, even before that, because it requires you to share space. You hear about improvisation all the time. You never hear about swinging. And then we have the blues. And the blues is a resilience and an optimism that's not naive. So in that way, in terms of our understanding of these things, the fundamentals, jazz puts you in contact with the type of decision making that's required. Nothing that jazz requires. It teaches you how to discern the difference between two things that seem the same but are not the same. Like I always noticed when I was a kid, my father and them could tell the difference between Sonny Stitt and Bird. So I'd be thinking they both play alto saxophone. How you know the difference between two people playing, but a little bit of the same thing.
Yeah.
It trains your acuity. Okay, these people play the same instrument, but they have different objectives and they play different things. And also, if you look at how we achieve balance, the drums are the loudest instrument. It's forced to play on every beat with the bass, which is the softest instrument. The cymbal is the highest pitch. It's forced on every beat to play with the lowest pitch, which is the bass. The piano is a percussion instrument with melodic properties. So it plays all in the rhythm section, and it's also a soloist. It's like the Congress. So it plays all of the keys, it can perform all the functions, and it can play by itself. And if you look at what the bass is like the judiciary, the bass is the bottom of the harmony, determines the direction of the progression, sets the volume of the band. You can always tell how civilized the band is by its attention to a bass, if the bass is not amplified. Now, the amplifier has made it so that then issues of balance sometimes are just on the sound man. So that's a different proposition, a different style of music. It's not a good or bad. It's just different. It's a different style. It's a different objective. So, I could go on and on with the many ways that we have things that are, it could only be in a democracy or for those who are seeking to figure out how to be democratic.
Where does this come from in you, Wynton? Like as you said at the beginning of our conversation, you said, I've been talking about democracy. I've been talking about social change. I've been making music about social change and democracy for years. And I look at like Black Codes Underground from the '80s, or I look at Blood on the Fields from '97, or I look at From the Plantation to the Penitentiary, just to name a few. I mean, these things have been part of your work forever. Where does that come from?
My father and them went it. All the musicians always talked about it. I always grew up with musicians, and they largely struggled. They weren't famous, or they were not popular, and they were just trying to make it happen. I used to always hear my father say about how they played. They just would get together and play, and sometimes they would have people, but they were very acute politically, and they were into everything that went on, and they talked about everything. In those times, it would be talking about Lyndon Johnson or Martin Luther King or Bobby Kennedy or the Civil Rights Act. Musicians always have a lot of political consciousness and a lot of social understanding. They were always involved in some type of education. And they also they live real lives. You know, people were dying of drug overdoses, and they had problems in their personal lives, and they were struggling making money, and all of these things are very real. So it was the environment I grew up in led me to be interested in this kind of thing. And studying in school, I could just always see the music, and knowing pieces like Coltrane, I Love Supreme, and Sonny Rollins, Freedom Suite. It's music that I grew up with.
It's interesting that it's instrumental music, hey? Like, I find that really interesting that instrumental music can talk about these things, even though, I mean, we associate, oftentimes music of social change with lyrics that are meant, lyrics that are meant to get a crowd together to change people's minds. It's interesting that instrumental music can do the same thing, hey?
Yeah, instrumental music actually goes deeper than words, because words are removed from the experience. So by the time you name something, it's already, like, I could call you Tom, or you can tell me something, man, I got a tattoo. Okay, I understand what you're saying, but I don't really understand what you're saying. If you played it, I would understand it much better. Now, you can't play and tell me I had a tattoo by playing. You're going to play something else. And that something else will be whatever is the impulse to do what you did. So because music is the art of the invisible, it's stuff like thoughts, emotions, memories, aspirations. Music deals with all of that. And that's why it's so powerful in that space. And the ability to hear instrumental music is a skill. And to give an example, the sound of your voice and the song of your talking is many times gives you more of an identification, and elicits more of a response from people than what you're telling them, unless you say something inflammatory. So, if you listen to Love Supreme, it's not as specific as what's going on, right? When I was growing up, what's going on, Stevie Wonder's records, you couldn't go anywhere you didn't hear that kind of music. And then in the 60s, if you take the kind of white folk music, and remember that I grew up in segregation, so everything was segregated. Like if it's Peter, Paul, and Mary, that was white music. So Stevie Wonder was black music, and American Bandstand was different from Soul Train. And in the area I grew up in, blacks lived over here, whites lived over there. So you have a tendency to look at the world in those ways because that's the world you live in. But jazz was always integrated. Jazz was a very different music. My father was one of the only people we knew who knew white people. So, and they loved each other. Like Bill Huntington was a bass player he played with. I'll never forget, because the world was so separate. I remember seeing them hug after a gig. And then we're Southern, man. We didn't be a whole lot of hugging going on at that time. Now, as people are much more kind of emotive in that way.
Yeah.
But we remember thinking, damn, look at that. Like that, just how powerful that was as a symbol. And that is a symbol of democracy. So when you're playing music, your consciousness is coming directly through your instrument. And as audiences are not trained to hear consciousness and sound, then they are more susceptible to being exploited.
Did you play a lot with your dad growing up when you were a kid?
Man, yeah, I played with him, but I was too sad to really play with them. The stuff they were playing. He let us play, though. Me and my brother would play. I went to a lot more gigs than my older brother went to. So he would let me play, but man, you had to be able to play on chord changes to play with them.
What do you mean you were too sad?
Man, I couldn't play on changes. My daddy didn't play complex music. Like they have music in 5/4 with all kind of chord progressions. I couldn't play on none of that. But he would let me get up there and make a fool out of myself.
Oh, I lost you there again, man.
Yeah, I'm going to be back.
No problem.
He would let me get up there and make a fool out of myself. And he was always encouraging, except if I played in the funk band most of the time, my brother and I.
Yeah.
So the ironic thing, we made way more money than my father made playing. And we really couldn't play. But we would play with him, and sometimes I would circular breathe and, get in my crouch in my stance, and everybody in the audience would start cheering. And my daddy would say, man, the circus is down the street. Like, he was always about music. But I spent most of my time teasing my father because he's serious. But I would joke and play with him constantly, So I always had a good time, even though I couldn't play. He called me once, man, I don't know, I might have been 40. I was in my mid-40s. And my father called me and said, yeah, man, I heard you on the radio playing on some song I played on. And he said, You ain't learned how to play on changes yet.
Ooh.
So, it just music. I mean, it would be fun. Or I might hear him play something and I would say, man, that technique is slipping, man. Those skills, they're not what they were, so I would be joking with him. But then the only thing is, when his skills actually started to slip, it wasn't funny. Man. I had decided to retire that joke because he told me once, okay, man, we can't joke about this skills because my skills are slipping now.
I'm struck by what you said earlier. You said you were playing in a funk band. You couldn't really play, but you guys were doing well, and you guys were, you and your brothers were making some money and playing shows. And you said your dad was playing kind of half-empty rooms. That must have been hard for you.
No, not really.
Just seeing your dad play to half-empty rooms, I would have thought,
My dad was dignified. Like he wanted to play that style of music he wanted to play. And he was very, you never got the high ground on him because he was really kind of zen. He wasn't a guy, he wasn't in a competition with you. Like if you wanted to be a better musician, you had to learn stuff. And he didn't need an external verification. Like he was not a person and he didn't have to put you down. He supported you. He come check out the funk band. He came and played with us. I never forget. He played a dance with us. We were playing this song by the Creators called "Keep That Same Old Feeling" by the Jazz Crusaders. Yeah. Keep that same old feeling. So it's a bridge section. So the other trumpet player in our band was a brother named John Roche. And I said, we said we're gonna have our daddy sit in, so he introduced on the mic. Of course, nobody knew who my daddy was. So he was saying it like they would know who he was. So he went to sit in, but then he remembered. He said, man, it's a real hard section in the middle of it, like with chord changes. He said, man, you can't have your daddy play on this tune, man. He's not gonna know what to play on that. Man. My daddy's gonna listen to that the first time, and the second time he's gonna play on it. And he was like, no way in the world. Man, the first time, my daddy listened to kind of what to change the second time. Yeah. Boom, he just played. Yeah. But Lebo, my boy, what we called him, he had never heard bebop or anything that had that type of vocabulary. Yeah. So when he heard my daddy play, he was like, man, what is that stuff your daddy's playing? Blah, 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 blah. He started trying to sing it. And he said, it was mind-boggling for him. So for me, I took it for granted because I knew people didn't like it, but I knew my father could play. So after that second time when he started soloing, and of course the people at a dance, they don't really care what nobody is playing. They're dancing. Yeah. But I would never forget the reaction of my boy was like, damn, man, your daddy is bad. Like he didn't know that kind of thing was possible in music.
Can we play something, Sam? Can you play that clip?
That's that sound.
That's Wynton Marsalis. That's your dad.
That's a hard tune. Okay, let me just that progression. First is in the key of E, which is okay for guitar players. It's an E major. Yeah. If you play a B flat instrument, that puts you in F sharp, and then the way the progression from he approached the progression from the bottom. What happened? He started the tune with that. Yeah, man.
You're pretty good on the piano yourself, boy.
No, don't tell him. He might come back from the grave and slap me. Don't say it. He always told me to learn how to play piano. I never did it. I always say, I guess I showed you. I tell him, I never learned how to really play. I guess I showed you.
Hey, I'm so sorry, by the way. I mean, we're talking about your dad here. I didn't mention that your dad passed away from complications of COVID-19. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. Thank you for condolences. But he was very natural and cool. He was cool in death as he was in life.
Really?
He accepted what it was. There was no angst or anger or none of that. He was like, hey, this is a cycle. He said, what I was messing with him about it. He said, well, what am I going to do? He started naming all the illnesses he had. He said, that needs something else to fall apart. It's like, okay. And he also made the important point to me. He said, the death of your loved one is no more significant than anybody else's. People are losing people.
Right. That's beautiful.
Yeah, he was soulful, man. I'm glad that I knew him. You know, I always feel grateful that I was his son. Just seeing him struggle with life, like how he did it. He was good to tease too, man. You never had a better person to tease and play with it because that wasn't his way. So he was like, you know, but I could make him laugh. I would mess with him all the time. It could be a very serious thing. I still would joke around. But sometimes he didn't want to laugh about stuff. He'd be like, this ain't the time for that.
There's a joy in that, man. I'm home now in Newfoundland. I haven't seen my mom in about a year, and my favorite thing to do is give her a hard time. There's a joy in that,
Yeah, man.
you know?
Come on. Yeah, you got to enjoy that. You got to have a good time while you can't messing with people, man. Come on, that's your mama. You know, play with her, lift her spirits up and joking and having fun.
Well, I'm glad you got through it. I mean, not that you're getting through it, but my God, what a sad thing. But I'm glad you found some perspective on it.
Nah, man, you know, I mean, I'm old enough. I mean, it hurts, and it's not like. I remember once I was playing a gig and a really older man came backstage to see me.
Yeah.
This was maybe 5 years ago. Now, this man looked, however old he was, he looked older. So he said he was in his 90s. And I didn't say you look young for your age. I thought, damn, I thought you was in your hundreds. And the man started saying he missed his father. Then, you know, I was shaking his hand. He said he missed. He said, I hear you talk about your father. I miss my father. Then we were kind of hugging. He was going to go. And we just held in like an embrace. It was touching. And he started crying about his father. And he said, you know, didn't matter. Like, it just never goes away. And I was thinking, man, a guy that age, you thought you can't conceive of him having a father.
Yeah.
And, I told him that. And we came out of the moment. I told him we both actually started to laugh about it. I waited the appropriate time. I said, man, you say you lied to you. Look in this mirror. So he looked in the mirror. I said, I'm gonna be honest with you. I can't conceive you even had a father. You look like Father Time. So you know, I mean, I'm not. It's not coming across good on the because it's you know he'd have to be here for you to see what I'm talking about.
I can picture it. I can picture it, man. I can picture it. Yeah.
Yeah, you know. So, man, you know that kind of stuff doesn't go away. It's just a part of maturity. Then one day you're gonna be on that plate. That's the cycle. That's just life. It's what it is.
I know. I remember my dad's gone now too, and I remember when I was a kid, we went to the. Oh yeah, thank you. But not long before we went, you know, an old fella from his neighborhood came to. He ran into him at a wake we were at, and he said, "Sure, for God's sake, you were old when I was 10. Like you're still old now. Like there's something about those people. You're right. You don't even imagine them being able to have a father. You know."
So your father was older when he had you, because you still look like you got Similac on your breath.
My dad was older when he had me. My dad was 40 when he had me. So not that old, but yeah, he died a bit young. It's yeah. I'm so glad and you're right. You know, you never really get over it. You never really forget about them, but you end up finding a little bit of peace. I want to play something. Take a listen to this. That's a bit of It Come Round Gin from Wynton Marsalis' new album, The Democracy Suite, with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra Septet. I want to talk to you about Jazz at Lincoln Center for a second. When you started over 30 years ago, the words that came with the founding of it was no segregation, no generation gap, and all of our music is modern. What does that mean to you now?
It means that we want to try to not be segregated. It's easy to be. And people love segregation because there's power in it. Pick your tribe. We're in a really heavy period of tribalism now. And that tribe can be set up anyway. It can be set up by race. It can be set up by gender, set up by age. So no segregation. We want to invite everybody in and make people be comfortable with what we're doing, because that was also what I perceived to be the ethos of jazz. We want to invite a lot of different musicians from different places in the music, different ways of the music, but we want to be acute about what our music is, because when you lose an acuity about what you're trying to do, you don't want to open your door and bring the person that's going to murder your whole family because of your philosophy. You have to, it's all balances. So that was one. The second was no generation gap, because we found at that point, that was 30 something years ago, that the separation of the generations in our country is worse than the other segregations, because the younger people, the desire to exploit them as a market at age 10, 11, 12, and then get through their sexuality for 13, 14, 15 through music is so powerful. And now it's just going on unchecked. Now, if you see what it is now, I told you, you always go a step too far. We're nearing that point with this, but you never know when it's going to happen. So we'll say no generation gap. Bring the old and the younger people more together. We don't have dances that we do together, no rituals of courtship that have generations, no real dialogue between generations. It's very important to have the kind of entire cycle of life present. It's social things. It's not just a wedding or a church that you're forced to go to.
Yeah.
And then all jazz is modern is the battle. The way you separate jazz from itself is by saying it should be rock and roll. And that's rock and roll is the future vision, and jazz should be rock and roll, or it should be the European avant-garde. So you got rock and roll, which comes from a version of jazz, and you have European avant-garde, which is a philosophical position that's not really in alignment with jazz. And I'm going to now tell you the only thing that's not good for you to be is yourself. So if you want to be good modern, either imitate rock and roll or imitate the European avant-garde. So you're put in an unwinning situation. You're put in a situation where for you to be a jazz musician on the cutting edge of something, you have to either be trying to be like Schoenberg and come to those kind of Proto-Germanic solutions that came around the turn of the 20th century from Europe, or you have to be, pop music and the kind of funk music we played when I was in high school. And that still remains a battle, because it's something built in our country. It's not so much about jazz. It's more about just the basic racism of what is our way.
You must be heartened. You must be heartened to see there's a lot of great new jazz out there right now. A lot of great young performers and a lot of big venues packed here. People play jazz these days. I mean, I went to see Kamasi play in Toronto a couple of years ago, and the place was jammed.
Kamasi and them are like a jam band from Seattle. They're not really playing jazz.
Really?
Not really. Like in no way is it disrespectful of them, or because it's unless it's disrespectful to not play jazz.
Right.
Like when we were playing in our funk band, we weren't playing jazz. We're playing funk.
Right.
It doesn't mean that funk is not good, but in America, the desire for an actual definitive art to not come from some Black folks has created a lot of interesting equations. And the equations now are so built into our way of life that it's hard to even, it's hard to unpack it. Like, it's our music, the music, jazz has clear fundamentals, but then those fundamentals are symbolically rooted in meaning. The problem with jazz becomes is when you disenfranchise people, you want your definitive art form to come from them. And you don't want those people in that position. So you try to figure out, how can I get these people under the people I want to be above this? So one way you do that is dumb their music down, which is what happened with jazz, and redefine it. So it's no disrespect to Kamasi or any, it's not personal.
Mm-hmm.
I very seldom even, but if you really check out the root of their music, it's like a Seattle jam band playing with the rest of their stuff on. When you want to know what a band plays, listen to what the drums and the bass play most of the time. And that will tell you what the form of music is. There are some musicians in the world who can play a lot of different music, but it's very difficult. Like it's difficult to play flamenco music and play jazz music. It's difficult to play Afro-Cuban music well. It's easy to play anything poorly, because this is the great era of saying, well, I play Afro-Cuban, jazz, Brazilian, techno, funk, but man, that's a lot of music to know if you want to play well. So
I understand that. I play Irish music, right? So and I know folks who then characterize themselves as playing fiddle music. And my buddy who has steeped himself in East Clare Irish music will say, "What the hell is fiddle music? Like
Right.
there is a tradition that we're playing here,
Right. And the thing is that tradition is a part of all other traditions. But if your friend who studied it then begins to defend that tradition, then he's seen as an enemy of progress. And he's not necessarily saying, don't play other styles of music. He's saying that this music has specific properties. Like If you look at a piece of jazz music all through the 70s, even now, the drum part will say Latin. Okay, what Latin? So if you grow up in that style, you naturally just doom to doom to doom to doom. There's nothing to do with Latin. It's just that's generic Latin. And if you start to play with musicians you know who are in that tradition, they'll tell you you really are not playing this music well. Like I've experienced it for years. I play Latin music very poorly. So when I started to get with Carlos Enriquez and other people more like family members, they would be like, "Man, I don't know what you're playing on this, but."
That's interesting. I think I understand what you're saying. I think it can be mischaracterized as being conservative, but I understand actually what you're saying, that there are properties and fundamentals inherent to the music that you can choose to really take seriously and learn and dig in on for the rest of your life.
Right. Because with music, like it's like there were many musicians who could have been Elvis Presley in the 1950s, but they were Black. So they couldn't occupy that space. Now, that's not against Elvis Presley. He had nothing to do with that.
Oh, that's the truth.
But now, okay, it's like race, the concept race is not real. It's a construct, but racism is real. So what do you do with that? Like the fact that whatever properties you were going to ascribe to Jewish people to justify messing over them, those properties were not true. But the fact that you messed over them was. So, not to get off of the point, but to be clearer, because when you discuss things that require acuity, you have to be clear, because the intellectual class is always trying to figure out how to obscure these things. And that is that the question of jazz's position in American culture concerns the relationship of slavery to the American identity and mythology. So, Black Americans today have very little or no knowledge of jazz. So it's our greatest achievement. We don't know anything about it. And our poor public education system and the education system makes sure you remain ignorant. You don't have to worry about that. Now, I don't blame that on white Americans. That's just the reality of the situation, because there's always white and Black people on either side of many issues. So to reduce it to white versus Black is to do a great disservice to it. Now, you take the average white jazz writer is actually a rock fan, and he wishes jazz would be something else without the Black identity at its core, or he just doesn't know what it is. Now, I'm not mad at him, because if it's not for him, you don't have anybody interested in what you're doing at all. Okay, at least you can have a dialogue with him, but his real like is not, he's not mad at your music, but his vibe is, man, I like the Rolling Stones. I grew up listening to whatever at this point, it's younger people from my generation, so 9 Inch Nails or whoever they like.
Yeah, it's
some kind of style that they actually grow up and have affinity to in life. Now, your music is a part of that. They write for a paper. Okay, you got to do a jazz. Yeah, I listen to a couple of jazz things. I got a friend that likes it. Okay, I'll write this article. No problem. But there's also been a systemic investment in the destruction of jazz, and that's not from those writers. They just in a bigger system. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and are you nervous about? I mean, and this is more tactical, but like I think about COVID-19. I think about that it's shutting down venues. It's making jazz musicians' incomes, which were already precarious to begin with, even more precarious. Are you nervous about the future here?
Yeah, I'm not nervous about the future. I'm nervous about now. People are starving. They're starving now. And the Louis Armstrong Foundation, we gave $1 million of Pops' money to 800 or 900 jazz musicians. But man, we need so much more money in the system. Being somebody who grew up seeing it, not with COVID. Yeah, and artists in general are struggling, but for jazz, it is a struggle. A lot of our musicians left New York and went home and they have to figure out how to survive. I'm not worried about it when we get back, because the music will get back, but some venues have shut, and we have to have enough people who say this is important for us to want to continue it. And, I always say we're not necessarily a must-have. If democracy is not a must-have, we're not a must-have. You just saw stuff go on, not just in America, it goes on all over the world with just a level of kind of just blatant corruption and just audacity that, jazz is tied in with all of these things, all the injustice you see. And it's not just something that's Black versus white. because we all have a responsibility for it. Black folks, white folks, people who are, and not in America, in other cultures, there's other problems that have nothing to do with jazz, but it's still it's an agency issue that plagues humanity. So I will talk specifically about American things, but I try to go beyond that and say the issue of getting agency for other people. It could be men and women. It could be, you go into some societies, women have no agency. Okay, are you unleashing all your creativity? Is it you're going to take half your population and you're going to subjugate it to? Is that the smartest way? Is that was pretended by the creativity we have and all of the things is there a better way? And this central idea, well, it's all boiled down to two basic ideas. And the question of do you believe in this? And that is that, do you believe that in symbiosis, me and you come together, okay? We don't have to agree whether Kamasi Washington is jazz or not, but we can sit down in a room and we can listen to music. You can say, well, listen to this. I can say, listen to that. Or do you think predatory, which doesn't really make a difference about any of this jazz. Let's exploit as much as we can, even down to what we do with the food that goes in the kids' classrooms. The strong should dominate the weak, get all the breaks, and subjugate them. And we need to create and keep a working class that we keep near poverty. And if they were smarter, they wouldn't be in that position. So these are the things that we are always fighting with.
This is fascinating. Wynton, I could talk to you forever. Thanks for your time. I got one question before we go. And it's a bit, it's not off topic, but it's a little bit off topic. When I was reading about you, and I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and I was reading about you, and what comes up is all the people you've got to meet throughout your life, or got to play with, or got to hang with, like Dizzy and Sarah Vaughan and Art Blakey and Clark Terry and even Ella. Can you give me a piece of advice you got from any sort of one of those legends that sticks with you?
Man, I have got so much good advice, man.
You got one?
I'm trying to think of one piece of good advice, like a kind of overview advice. I think John Lewis was my great kind of mentor. I would go to his house every day, and I don't know if it's advice. I'm just the way he would do things. So he would take his music out, and he would spend a lot of time spreading his music out. And he was known as somebody who was very meticulous. And he would always tell me, play the melody. Like if I start improvising and I play the melody, and I'm a man, I'm in my 30s, play the melody, you're not playing the melody. So I noticed he would spread all his music out, and then he would start playing. And when you looked at what he was playing, he didn't play a single note of the music he had just spread out. So I was one day, I was looking at him do it. I would sit right over here and he would be here playing. So I started laughing when I missed my entrance, and he stopped playing. He said, "You missed your entrance." I said, "I'm looking at your music. You're not playing a single note of the music that's written there." He said, "Concentrate on what you're playing on your part." I said, "Yeah, but are you going to play the music that's on the paper?" He said, "I am playing the music that's on the paper." I said, "Well, it doesn't look like it." He said, "It doesn't look like it because those are only implications. You live your life in terms of implications." I said, "But you tell me to play the melody all the time." He said, "Yeah, that's because you don't understand the implications of the melody yet."
That's next level stuff, man. Like that's eighth level musical thinking there,
That was him, man. Those are only implications. But yeah, he was very straight because those are only implications. Yeah, but you telling me to play the melody. That's because you don't understand the implications.
Yeah. Wynton, thanks so much.
Hey, brother. All right. Thanks.
I could talk to you all day, man.
One day.
I hope you can come back to Canada and we'll play some fiddle music or something like that.
Yeah, I love it. I love the fiddle tradition.